So the next hour, or hour and 10 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing remixing. Josh danced around remixing a bit. Roy went into a little bit more detail behind it. I'm going to start from the beginning and then lay the groundwork that's associated with that. But before I actually begin, first I'll mention I don't have a slide deck for this conversation. So this is all going to be real time. Here's the website. We do this, we move this, we do this thing around. And again, like all the other recordings, a lot of the presentations, we're recording them and updating them as we can. So the second one I will mention is that there's a workflow, and this is the same discussion that uh, Josh mentioned, and that is the general workflow associated with building a book. So the topic that we're dealing with here is predominantly focused around books and not other aspects like how would you build a question bank or other things like that, although that is folded into it. So I just wanted to reiterate the typical five-step process that's associated with starting a book is first get an account. So that's not a problem here because you need an account in order to register for this conference. So therefore, that's already taken care of. The second one is once you have an account, everyone can see the screen. You can see the screen, right? Yes, you can. I think you can. Okay. Uh, so once you have an account, then you're empowered with the keys to the LibreVerse. And one of those keys is, again, in the Conductor project. So the Commons is the front end cataloging system. The back end is the Conductor page. So the front end, anyone can access. The Conductor page needs an account in order to be able to access. In order to complement what Roy was talking about, you can browse through bookshelves, and that's useful if you're going through the central bookshelves, not so useful if you're looking at individual campuses bookshelves. So if you want to be able to quickly find the version that Roy has remixed, which is a significant deviation from the original source material, it may be more awkward, and it's more convenient to go to the catalog system and not talk college, but talk algebra. And it will pull up all the books that have the word algebra in keywords and titles and such. And it has the same thing for authors. And that gives you a quick look down and dirty in order to do that. And you can identify and have different filters here in order to be able to say, I only want in the central bookshelves, or I want ones in the other bookshelves. We will modify this hopefully in the next few months such that every book is going to have what I refer to as a remixing quotient. And a remixing quotient will tell you how much content in this book is from from other books on our infrastructure. And that makes it easier in order to not cut through the same type of book. Like Roy was mentioning, there are many remixes of OpenStax books. They're largely restructured. If you want to be able to look at other people's presentations of something like foil or something along the lines there to keep in the theme of Roy's field, you want to see 5 different presentations of the topic, not 5 copies of the same presentation. And this is one of the issues that I've found particularly onerous in the OER community, is to be able to not just keep track and find stuff, but to be able to find the stuff that you want in that community or in that corpus of content. And we're very excited in order to be able to release that because that's going to be done not at the page level, but at the block level. So if you can actually identify this page has 50% remixing and 50% customized material off of there. And if you don't think that that's exciting, spend a week looking through and finding content, and then you'll know exactly why that's an exciting concept, because no one else does anything like that because they can't, because they don't have control over the corpus like we do. Okay, so enough of the commons. And we'll go to the Conductor page. So first thing, you get an account. The second thing is that you need to create a Conductor page. So I'm hoping that most of you, if not all of you, have created a Conductor page for a project. If you haven't done so, this is the time in order to do that. Pull up a page, make sure you're signed in, and then we can actually rock from there. Make sure that the chat is on here. I'm going to hope that Jennifer or Josh are able to chime in if I'm missing anything in the chat that requires addressing for me. So again, account, access the Conductor and create a Conductor page. Anything that's green here means you create something new. So you create a Conductor page right here. and it pops up with this window. Josh mentioned this already. You give the title of the page. The title is initially fixed in stone, let's say soft stone, and then we can change the title after the fact. You don't need to worry about it too much when things are in production, when they're under construction, and then you can modify things afterwards. So I'm going to say this is Delmar's special text. I am creating a project. You cannot create a book without creating a project. Period. Period. Exclamation point. Period. You cannot go and do this. And this is the issue that we had with sandboxes before, is that they were not in parallel line, and people would create projects and not books, and people would create books and not projects. And it made it difficult for us to know who was creating what was it meant in order to address, how can you actually facilitate the construction efforts that are going on, because it just doesn't track it. So now that everybody creates a project, a conductor project, then we're able to keep track of what's being constructed and then help out and provide all the benefits that Josh mentioned off here, and Roy also went over too. So I'm going to make the Delmar special text. I have the ability to make this public or private, which is exactly the same as what it is on Adapt, which is whether it's a course or a question. It just basically say, are people able to find that project? It does not mean that people are able to look into the project, but they're able to get the information. This is a title, and this is a summary of the project. And that makes it convenient, because if you are creating a project and it happens to be a unique project, like underwater Bavarian basket weaving, and you may want to do a check to see, is someone else making a book on underwater Bavarian basket weaving? And this gives you the ability to look and see, yes, there is a project available, and then you can communicate, and then you can make a mega book on underwater Bavarian basket weaving together. So the idea is to be able to work together in order to move forward and not replicate the wheel, and not waste effort. And this is one of the biggest issues that the OER community has right now, because it's heavily fragmented, and it's not clear that this person's working on this, and this person's working on this, and this person's working on this. And the fact that these two people are really building the same resource, they should be talking together in order to make it so they don't have to work as hard. So, but by default, we have this as private, and that's just because we don't want to gum up lots of projects in there with with public things. But for now, just keep yours private, and you create a project page. Here's the empty project page. It's ready to go here. It says the project's been created. It has a few details at the top here. It has these other things here that Josh already went over. If you want, I can address them afterwards, but the key point of this discussion is remixing. So sign in, create a conductor page. Now we're going to assume that the conductor page is meant to make a new book. Now that new book may be completely customized, meaning that you're writing it from scratch. It may be that you already have an existing book that's off of our platform and you want to bring it onto our platform, or it may be just remixing of existing material that you'll then customize, edit, and manipulate. Those all require creating a new book in order to work off of. So you have this green button that says Create Book, and you click on that. And then you select the library that we're on here. We're going to put this in chemistry, because chemistry is the best field and everyone should be studying it. And it has the title that's grabbed from the project page. This is more set in stone than the project page title. And I pick create. This is making an empty page for me to be able to flesh out and to build. So that is necessary. I cannot remix or I cannot edit content without having an empty page ready to go. Now, I mentioned this before, that you can use conductor pages for things other than building textbooks. And if that's the case, you are not creating a template page that's coupled to your project, because you're not making a book. You may be doing some other resource. When it creates the page up, which is taking a few moments longer than I would like, it creates a front matter, it creates a back matter, and an empty chapter. So it's just largely, this is what a page would look like, or a book would look like when you're ready to rock. Is there something going on with it? Okay, here we go. So when that's done, that green button here that said new book is now a blue button that says textbook link. And that's the link that goes to your book. And Roy presented that, or at least used this an example, and Josh may have done it too when I was stepped away. But nonetheless, this right here gives you the ability in order to click on here, and it goes to your empty book. You have the ability in order to go to your book and start editing, but editing is going to be a topic of tomorrow. Today, we're talking about remixing. So we're not going to be discussing how to edit content on the pages. We're only going to be dealing with how to manipulate pages. This is akin to going onto your computer and being able to manipulate files and organize files, but not editing the content in the files. And that takes a different skill on your computer. It takes a different skill on our infrastructure. So again, every book has a conductor page, period. So we signed in, we created a conductor page, we created an empty template page, and now we're ready to start modifying and using it constructively. I will mention what happens at the end, which is once you are happy, that book that you created and that template page is made in the workbench, what Josh mentioned, this special area. If we were in the matrix, we'd call it the construct. We used to call it the sandbox, but this is a collective area. Construct or workbench was a better description for what we were doing here, but we were afraid that people would think that we were stealing things from the matrix, and we wanted to be a little bit more original. Although it's a good film in order to be able to steal from. So before getting into here, I want to mention these two buttons here. Every book that gets compiled, what compiled means, actually, let me take a step back here. You have a book in the workbench, right? That's the area that is not production. That's not meant for students to access. It's only meant for authors to edit and to manipulate. Once they are happy that they want to be able to move it over, then they have the ability in order to publish it, quote unquote, that moves it off of there. Josh, do you think you can handle Ready here? I think she just needs an account on the specific library.
Where are we?
She's in the chat right there. So
Okay, I'll look for it.
thank you.
Okay.
So again, you build a book in the workbench when you're happy, and happy does not mean 100% happy, just happy enough that you want students to be able to see and the community to be able to see it. Then you ask us to publish it. Now, that process is a manual process that we do on our side. So it's not an automatic, I'm going to shift it over on your side. And the reason for that is that we want to review it for the structure, and we'll give you recommendations if we feel it will work well with your learning management system or if it doesn't. And for example, and I'll talk about this when I show structures, Canvas only accepts 2 levels in your book: chapters and sections. If you have subsections, it won't technically accept it. So we restructure all books when we export them into 2 levels. But if you're in Blackboard, they will accept it. So there's a little bit of unique aspects that we want to be able to address and give you some guidance in terms of how things are structured. We'll run several of the bots I talked about before in order to address accessibility. I talked about the Brad bot because Brad Pitt is pretty. It goes through the book and makes pages pretty. Basically, that's standardizing the underlying HTML, fixes it in order to make sure it's make sure that it's easy to remix effectively and to edit effectively, which is critical in terms of how we operate. And a few other bots that we do in order to see if there are issues or concerns that we'll put out there. This is not a full-blown accessibility review. This is just a topical thing saying, you have a problem here, you have a problem here, you have a problem here, and here you go. And such. And if you want a more detailed accessibility review, then contact us. We have to then go to our accessibility expert, and then we'll talk about how to actually make that work. But that's not a free process because it requires external time in order to be able to process. So anyways, so what I said was a book is in the workbench. You ask in order to publish it. We take it out of the workbench and we put it into your campus bookshelf. That's what Roy showed you for Consumnes River College. That was their bookshelf that they have. Each campus has the potential of having their own bookshelf on each of the 16 libraries. The bookshelf is created, if it didn't already exist, at the time the very first book is moved into that bookshelf, the first time it's published. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. Why is that? Because you have a whole lot of empty bookshelves and no one wants to cut through a whole bunch of empty things like that. It just makes life easier for everybody. At the time that we publish, we also do what we call compiling. And so compiling takes the book, generates all the export options, the PDF, the common cartridge export, hooks up the bookstore so you can actually get a physical copy of the book if you want to go about that. It will generate the EPUB, and it will do a few other things, including evaluating the licensing of the book and a few other things connected to that. You have the ability to recompile it anytime that you want. I'll show that more tomorrow unless we have time today. But anytime that you edit the book and you want it to be reflected in the export, at least in terms of the PDF and the print copies, you want to recompile. And that's just a standard practice across the board. Why is that the case? Because it takes a bit of time in order to generate those exports. So they're not just instantaneous out there. So you need to be able to process that. And we don't do that because it takes automatically, because that would just be a waste of time for everybody. So just to reiterate those words, because I know that sometimes these terms can get a little confusing. We build a template book. Once the template book is made, it's made in the workbench. We do our magic. We do some editing using the skills that we are discussing tomorrow. You request to publish this. Right now, that process of requesting is in the timeline. It will be moved up to the front end of the book. So we have this thing called publishing. This is a workflow, and then we have this publish request, and that right there processes it. But in reality, you can send us an email, or you can submit a ticket, or you can make a comment on your conductor page. Anything that gets to us will work. This is going to be a more formalized process for doing it. We do our magic. It takes somewhere between 24 hours to 48 hours in order to be able to process that. If we feel that there are lots of issues or concern that you should take a look at, we can do so. If we find things that are offending or vulgar or anything like that, and that's only happened once or twice, then we'll basically tell you to go back in order to take a look at that, and it's moved into the bookshelf and compiled at the same time. I will mention here that once you put the book into the bookshelf, it's still editable. You could still continue to update it, continue to fix it. In fact, the only difference between a book in the workbench and a book in the bookshelf is the fact that it's compiled and everyone can see it. Now, I'm a big proponent in what I refer to as open construction. Is that many times if you make a book that's unique, that there's a need out there, it's more important for people to get a resource that is 95% honed and ready to rock than getting delayed access to 100% perfect resource. That's my philosophy. Not everyone shares that philosophy. Some people want to protect and hone and hammer out and then release their Michelangelo's David to the world in a fanfare. But the reason that I prefer an open infrastructure is that that's the reason why LibreTexts exists. Because if we were not following that sort of approach, then everything would be hidden behind some sort of wall. It'd be difficult to find, and it wouldn't be out there, and people wouldn't have found it in order to scale things up. This is the same model of how Wikipedia operates. If you remember 15 years ago to 20 years ago when Wikipedia came out, it looks significantly different then than it does now. The same thing applies to us. In that we have this concept that's constantly developing. If you go back to the Wayback Machine and you see what the ChemWiki looked like in 2008, I do that from time to time when I want to laugh at my skills at that time. You can look and see what we're doing. So that's my belief in terms of how I operate, but you can do either way. I don't care. So before we begin, in terms of remixing, I think there was a question or a couple of questions that popped in here that may require addressing. Alex asks, how much would it cost our campus to have our campus bookshelf to save all of our books? So right now, the way that we have things set up is that any campus anywhere in the world can generate 5 free textbooks. That they can customize. Now they have access to everything on our corpus. They have access to the whole million question or the million pages that we have there. But if you want to generate more than 5, you get 5 free books, and that's collective over all libraries. And after that, we ask you to join our consortium. And this is what I presume Jennifer wrote here, who still has my name signed in for some odd reason. Or actually, I'm now Jennifer Rogers, and she's me. I don't know why. We've changed on Zoom, but nonetheless, and there's more discussion around the consortium off of there. I will compare this thing to, for example, Pressbooks, where they don't give you anything for free, and you have to pay $500, $700 a year in order to be able to get a single book, irrespective of a whole set book of books. And that's because we're mission over money. We're not-for-profit versus for-profit enterprises, and I encourage you to take advantage of that. So hopefully that addresses your question, Alex. If not, please let me know. Alex did a follow-up asking about adapt access, and adapt is separate from the consortium membership, but for the state of California, it's currently free, at least for as long as the state is willing to support the development of adapt. Since you're in the state of California, Alex. Okay, so let's get this thing rolling here. Josh mentioned this timeline. If you have a desire in order to look at this timeline broken up here in individual components, I encourage you to take a look at that. But I want to go back to the book. So here's Delmar's special book. Now, the remixer. So the intent that we have for the conductor pages is the back-end master page that you're able to go to and use in order to be able to build and customize and tweak and do other things. And that the library, where you're looking at the book, is just basically a viewer. It used to be that we didn't have the conductor and that we put the tools for editing and doing processing on the actual page itself. And that resulted in the blue bar and lots of options, things like that. We're working on trying to migrate all those resources into the conductor page, where you're able to identify and you can, in order to access the glossary and modify options and various aspects of that. And what you view on the library is just viewing and reading purposes. For those of you that are familiar with YouTube, YouTube does the same thing. You have the YouTube channel as one site, and then you have the studio on the other site that you use in order to manipulate and do the stuff. It's the same process. Use the technology that's meant in order to focus on it. One's meant for reading, one meant for organizing and restructuring and even editing a process, editing a little bit. So, okay. Every book that gets compiled gets a commons page. That's an entry in the commons. That's an entry when you actually do a search that's off here that I showed you before. So any book that you see in the commons is a compiled book. If a book is not compiled, it's not in the commons. Doesn't mean it's not a page you can't access on the library. In fact, we have a lot of pages that are not books, that are in repositories that are not meant to be compiled as books. But you can still find, in fact, 19 of the top 20 pages that are most popular from Google are from individual pages that are not part of libraries on our platform, and actually content that was created either by faculty or by students as part of Open Pedagogy Project. What's this? Are we are having a problem. And I presume this is also a problem. Okay, so we have an issue with the data center. Can Josh or Jennifer poke Jake about this and tell him that this is very important in order to be able to process and handle? I'm hoping that this is going to come up in a moment. Otherwise, we are going to have a problem. You don't need to worry about logging out. This is an issue on our side or the data server side that hosts all our servers. These things are actually run on Amazon. So if that is the case, it will come up momentarily. We have something like a 99.98% uptime, but every once in a while you have a glitch or we need to update things and you'll be notified as they come in. So
my experience is it has a sensor for when you're doing a presentation.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way in order to talk about that.
Yeah, I just sent Jake a letter.
Okay, well, I'm gonna do this pseudo old school. So you can access the remixer of your book via the conductor page. and Josh showed you that. You can also access it via the tools section of this blue bar. So if you click on here and you do the remixer, it will pull it up. And the remixer is not connected to the Commons and Conductor right now. It will be eventually. So I could still do the remixing and everything. It's just not doing it directly in the conductor page. We are probably going to at some point remove the whole blue bar and then use this reader view aspect, reader view interface that we've been working on for a while that I will be discussing a little bit later on. So this is the remixer. Now, in talking about the remixer, we should talk about um, what the remixer is supposed to do. And I mentioned already this analogy in terms of an operating system. The remixer is meant to organize pages, whole pages. That's it. It does not do anything inside the pages. That right there requires editing of the page in order to be able to manipulate. Now, yes, we could kind of make something a little bit more powerful from that, but it's useful in order to separate those two concepts, just like your filing system. You're used to being able to handle files and documents and different things. That's a different skill set than being able to edit the content in the file, which obviously changes depending upon the nature of the file. In this case here, it changes depending upon the field and the nature of the way the coding is put together on the text itself. For example, many of you saw Roy's editing content and then probably freaked out with all this LaTeX and everything that's put every place. That's a typical response to everybody who sees LaTeX. But if you're not into math, then you're not going to be dealing with that sort of thing. So Remixer is meant in order to handle content handle the pages of things. So the remixer is really simple when you put this in place. Okay, it's back up again, so it was down for just a moment. But this doesn't change anything. I'm just going to be accessing the remixer from the other page. So this is the remixer. So the remixer has two parts to it. It loads up the book automatically. So we used to have a process where you manually upload a book and you select it and things like that. We got rid of that. So if you see any videos or anything that may reference that, we have changed that and made this a bit easier. We do have a version 2.0, technically 3.0, that we're going to be releasing soon, and soon means probably 3 months or so, that will update a few of the things here. One is associated with something that Roy mentioned, and a few other things that we want to be able to tweak in order to be able to make it a little bit better in the way that we want to operate. But nonetheless, the technology behind here is relatively simple. And with the exception of this indication up here, and yours is going to look different. You're not going to have this bar right here. And I have this because I'm an administrator. If I were in demo mode, it would just basically have remix mode. So ignore this, please, and just focus on this thing down here, because this is where the nuts and bolts are. And then a little bit is involved up here. And this nuts and bolts basically is on the right-hand side is the book. This is the book that I created, the template that I put in place. um, in here. So it has the front matter, the back matter, and a empty chapter. That's just as a default. Anytime I see a plus, I can expand it. And you see, yeah, the front matter has a title page, has an info page, has a table of contents page. Every book that needs to be compiled needs to have those things, period. Then you can add additional things onto it, like licensing, about the author, about the book, preface, acknowledgments. You can do an introduction. You can put down pictures of your dog, whatever you feel is applicable for the front matter that's out there. As many of us know, students, and probably even most of us, skip over almost everything in the front matter and go straight to the content in the chapters. But nonetheless, you have the ability to do that. The back matter that's generated automatically gives you an index, gives you a glossary, and gives you a detailed license. And the detailed licensing is essentially saying, here are all the pages in your book, and here are all the licenses for every single page in the book. So this right here is what I mentioned yesterday as a more complete, more honest description of the nature of the licensing of the content on that page, or on that book, that is. I will talk probably tomorrow about index and glossary. I think Josh showed it this a bit. It takes a little bit of effort in order to polish it, but you can use other people's glossaries. And when you have a glossary, it then makes your book a little bit more dynamic because it'll put definitions into the book if you hover over a text and things like that. And that makes things more useful than to me and able to flip to a glossary and looking at the term, sort of old school physical copies. So enough of those. Let's talk about remixing. So Tom asked the question, why does it say LibreText chemistry book on here? That's because this is a generic page that we used in order to be able to build this. The second one is that we can all agree that chemistry is the best field that we should be studying, and it should be branded everywhere that's out there. When we migrate this to the conductor page, it's not going to be a page that's a LibreText page, library page. It's going to be actually integrated into the conductor, and you're not going to have anything like that. So anyways, Nadine at least agrees with me on that. So now what does, that's the right panel. The left panel is everything else. You have access to 1 million pages of content here. Now, because I'm signed as an administrator, I have access to the workbench, the sandboxes. This is still antiquated. We haven't deactivated it. The under construction area. You don't have access to any of those three. You will only see these 3 topics. And in some libraries, you may not even see learning objects. For example, the business library doesn't have that put in place. Martin asked the question, once a book is harvested, how can it be added to the remixer? When a book is harvested and it's processed and it's digested and it's spit out and compiled into a book, it will be probably added into the bookshelves that you're able to select and find accordingly. And that's how you're able to, after a book is harvested, you can do that. It's not uncommon that faculty are endeavoring to build a book. They know that they're going to remix from a specific resource. They know that resource is not on our platform, and they request us to harvest that resource. We harvest it, we clean it up, we standardize it, we put meta tags onto it as necessary, we add licensing information for the auto attribution system, and then you just basically go to the book and say, okay, that book happens to be this book right here, and then you're able to remix from it. And we have a form for requesting harvesting at harvest.libretext.org. And maybe Jennifer can put the URL for that on there, and that goes into our queue and order process. I may emphasize that harvesting is sort of a secondary thing for our activities. It takes a bit of time in order to harvest. We have a few people who are doing it pro bono, but if you're actually going to be doing a lot of extensive harvesting, then talk to us because we need a little bit of support for the students that are bringing it in. It's a great return on investment using students, but it's not an infinite return on investment. It requires a little bit of finances. So anyways, back to the matter at hand. You have access to the entire the other library right here. You can click and look at any other library right there. Queries should be renamed global, which we're going to be doing in the new version of that. But you have access to 16 libraries there, not just chemistry, which is the one connected to my book, and it was loaded up automatically as a default. So now comes the real power of the remixer, which is just simple drag and drop. You have the ability to come in and take any chapter. Let's say chapter 2, the alkaline earth metals. I'm going to click and drag it over, and now it comes in. And that right there is 90% of what the remixer is doing. So you have the whole portfolio of the library here. You have your book right here, and it's just dragging and dropping. Now, what I did is I dragged this over here, and it was originally chapter 4 right there, and it went to chapter 1 right here. This is because we have the auto number on. The auto number will automatically number these things starting from whatever number that you put onto it. And this has some connection to what Roy was talking about in terms of whether it's 0 or 1. That requires going into the options here, which I want to go into in a moment. But the utility off of here is that you could slice and dice and move everything around, and it will automatically handle the numbering for you. You'll also see in the sections below here what was 4.1 now becomes 1.1 because the auto number reshuffles these things. You can come in and say, I'm going to take this empty first chapter and put it right there. And then it shifts it and it structures these things down. So for those of you that remember writing papers before EndNote or any other reference system where you had to keep track, and if you were in the sciences, you had to number things appropriately, you weren't using parenthetical references, and it was really a pain in the rear in order to be able to do. Auto referencing systems like EndNote came in and made things much easier. That's essentially the same concept here. You don't have to keep track of which one comes first and change the numbering off of here. It does it before you. The bonus here is if the page is constructed properly, and most of our pages are constructed properly, but we haven't gone through and edited it every single point. When you change the number on the title, it will also change the equation numbers, it will change the figure numbers, and it will change the title numbers and all references thereof internally. And that right there is a real game changer in terms of being able to remix and move these things around. Because if you didn't do something like that, and you took chapter 1 or section 1.8 of this book and 8.3 of this book, and you put them together, you need to go in and change every single entry of the book in order to be able to organize it. And then you decide you want to remix and rearrange it, then you have to go in and do it again over and over and over again. To my knowledge, we are the only ones who have this infrastructure in the OER landscape. And the point is, make remixing easy for faculty. And if you can do that, you can bring in more faculty into using OER, customizing OER, adopting OER, and having the benefit that we want OER to have in the classroom. So I can come in and drag these things over. I can say, I want something from organic metallic chemistry under structural fundamentals. I can grab structural fundamentals and pop it right there, and it behaves in the same way that we have going on here. So Roy, I think, is correcting me a little bit here. If there's a text within the section of the form in your... Okay, that's true. So it changes references to these things, but if you have explicit text that says, we did this in this chapter, we did this in this area that's written down there, we don't go in and modify that. That requires reviewing of things. We might be able to make a check in order to see if there are references to that in the book in order to tell people, yes, you need to go into that page and modify it. And that's not a bad idea. And I think... yeah, same thing that Roy did twice. Katie asked the question, what if we are doing something like an encyclopedia that has a bunch of entries that are not organized by topic? Is there something better to do than numbering? Yeah, you could turn off numbering. I'll get to it in a moment. And then you can rearrange it in whatever order you want. And you can delete these entries as necessary. You're not forced in order to be able to do this. It's just it's a real benefit in many circumstances. But alphabetical is one way in order to do it. We're going to change a little bit more of the power of adapt of the remixer soon, like I mentioned in version 3.0, that will help to handle a bit of these things, to handle alphanumerics or any text in front of it. If you feel like you want to write the word chapter in front of it, you can go about doing that in a more flexible manner than we have. So Dr. Azon said, what does it mean you have insufficient permissions to modify this page? That probably means that you are not signed in on the library itself, that this bar right here is not black. If you actually sign in by clicking on the button here that says sign in and this bar goes black, then you're able to have permissioning that's involved in that. We're going to modify this quickly in order to be able to address this. Azon, if you're able to hold off just a little bit, we can then address this in more detail. You should have demo mode that you're able to do everything that we're doing. You're just not unable to save. I'm hoping that that's the case. You just have to pull up a new book. So please hold on just a few moments and then we can address it. I don't think we can't go into chat rooms yet, or can we? Actually, let's do that. If you're willing to go into a chat room with Josh, that would be great. How you can wait. Okay. This is relatively straightforward, and you have the breakout room in order to be able to go this in detail, so you're not losing much off of here. Okay, so I dragged and dropped, I put this thing down here, and this is where I'm going to be mentioning that the remixer doesn't make these pages automatically. Uh, you are restructuring and you're building your vision on the right-hand side. That vision doesn't exist except for between you and the remixer. Uh, at any time you want to, you can save that map, which will save this structure, which is fine. I don't typically do that. What I typically do is I want to modify things and then I want to push this structure to the server. I want it to be made a reality. And I do that by pressing save to server. And save to server is a two-step process. The first one says you're going to save to server. Great. And then at that point, it says this is what's going to be done. It wants to make sure that you are aware that this is what's going to be done when you click the second save to server button. So when you do this thing and you see something along the lines of 370 pages are going to be deleted, and you don't intend on doing that, you may want to stop and go back to the book and see what did you do wrong. So I recommend taking a closer look at this overview that tells you how many pages are added, how many are moved or edited, and how many are going to be deleted. And then I save to server. And then I've given the remixer the thumbs up to say, go for it. Yeah. And it goes for it. And this right here takes a bit of time depending upon how many pages you're doing or how many manipulations you're putting in. Largely, it depends upon how many pages that you're creating from scratch, because that takes a little bit more time with the database than being able to move pages or changing title of pages or things like that. And it's going through and it's making these pages. And it's going through and it should give you a timeline. And once it's done, I can click on here and I can go to my book. That's the same button as I didn't have the conductor page on here. It's the same button that goes to the conductor page. And here is the book that I've created. And that's it. That's most of what you're doing is dragging and dropping and rebuilding these things. I can come in and revise the book again, revise current book, and that essentially pulls the book back up in the current incarnation. And then you can do the process over and over again. So it's the equivalent of saving when you do this cycle off here. So I recommend if you're doing lots of extensive edits and things like that, save every once in a while in order to be able to put it together. Most of the time, it doesn't have much of an issue. It's just my preference of auto saving as we go. Okay, so here's the book again. It's created chapter 2. It has these sections. It has these sections on here. I can click on any of these sections. It pops up a properties page. So this is saying this is the title of the property. At this point, I can actually modify this. If I did this, what do you think is going to happen? You think I'm actually going to be changing the title? No. Why? Because I have auto numbering on, and everything before the colon is handled by auto numbering. If I want to change this number right here, I have to turn auto numbering off, and then it will work. And that's the way in which you can actually structure these things to be different than alphanumeric. If I click on this thing again, it will give me some meta tags. Those probably are not important. We'll remove that. It tells you a little bit about the type of the thing that will also be removed. And it gives you, again, a link. And this right here is the URL title, and this is the page title. These are normally locked together. I'll tell you more about that later on. But this is what students see, and this is what the computer sees. So I can cancel this, and there you go. Now, that was just creating pages and bringing them over here. I can rearrange it and say, I want 2.5 to be there. And now what was 2.5 became 2.3 because auto number is on. It then reshuffled the numbering, and there you go. Now, if I revert it, I can undo and bring it there. And if I were to turn off auto numbering, I can move it up to here. And you notice it didn't auto number, which is exactly what you'd expect it to be when it's on there. If I click this back on again, and I just touch it, it will automatically process. And that. Now, let's talk about colors. There were 3 colors that you'll see on the remixing. There's green, there's orange, and there's red. Anything that's red will have a strikeout. And most of you would probably assume that red means delete, and that's exactly what it means. It means it will delete this thing and strike it out once I save it to the server. So I can come in and obviously change all these things like this, and it will have no effect until I save it to the server. So you'll notice as I delete this page here, it then reshuffles the next page and it renumbers it to 2.2 because it was right here. Why? Because I have the auto number on. Yeah. And it didn't affect these other ones because I had rearranged this with auto number off and turned it back on again. So anything that's orange means that you are changing the title or the position, when they're oftentimes correlated, and just tells you that something is being changed on that. It may involve the URL or some other details behind it, but this is a convenient thing. So one of the things that we do when we check a book for publishing is we pull it up in the remixer and we just check what the remixer says in terms of structure and organization and things, because the remixer saves all sins. Let me rephrase that. Solves all sins that you would have if you were to manually creating these pages. And that's what people used to do in the past. You still have access to doing this, although we're going to be removing that capability. I'm not going to be talking about that other than pointing out the button and then probably removing the button later on today. So, and then obviously I can come in and create a new page, and that's green. And then if I do save to server, I have 1 page is created, 4 that will be renamed, 3 pages that will be deleted. And I say, yes, that's exactly what I want. And then off it goes again. And there you go. And that right there is most of what you're going to be doing with the remixer. I can go back to the remixer again. And off you go. Now, I want to mention one bigger thing before we actually go back into a couple smaller things. Now, what do you think is the most important thing when you're remixing? Is it the ability in order to put things together in the structure that you want, or is it the ability in order to identify what pages you do want in order to be able to mix things together? Who says it's the technology, and who says it's the preparation? And you're 100% right. Because if you don't have the preparation, if you don't know what you're going to be remixing, you don't know what you're making. And that's that. So in order to facilitate that, you need to create some sort of structure, some sort of organization. And we call that a remixing map. Josh, did you go over remixing map while I stepped away?
I showed them one.
Okay. So what do you think a remixing map is? Well, a remixing map is a map to tell you what pages exist in the library and how you want it to be organized in your book. Yeah. And when you're building a new book and you have a big picture of how you want it to be, a remixing map is integral. If you don't know how it's going to be going, you can do remixing map, or you can do remixing slowly by evaluating the pages, doing the browsing and such that Roy mentioned, and say, okay, I like this, and then bring it over. But a remixing map is some way in order to organize that. So I'm going to click on this logo here. Unfortunately, it's pulling up this thing. And the first thing to emphasize about remixing map is that remixing map has no structure. Let me phrase that. A remixing map has no fixed structure. One person's remixing map may look different than another person's. One person can use a Word document. One person can use an Excel form. One person can use toilet paper. It doesn't really matter. The key point is to have something that tells you, this is the book that I'm creating. I may have some organized way in order to identify the outcomes and things. And this is the page I want to go into that section. And this is the page I want to go into that section in that order. You need to have some organization. In fact, I recommend making a remixing map before you even touch the remixer. And that's oftentimes what we have as a preamble homework before we discuss the remixer, but we didn't give it to you here because the way the timing worked in this conference. The remixing map is at the top of the remixer option. I will show it to you right here. Let me just paste the copy of the link into the chat. And that goes to an example of the remixing map. This is an entry in the construction guide for you to be able to access. So here's the remixing map again. There was a really beautiful remixing map that Lubbock Christian University did a few years ago. where they have something like this. I color code this to emphasize it. They basically had the stuff in yellow, and that is the book that they were creating. The stuff in green was the library and where things were. So this was an introductory chemistry book. And they said they wanted to follow an organization that was similar to Tro's introductory chemistry book, following Roy's emphasis on structure and organization as a starting point for building a book. So identified the first chapter is going to be called Chemistry and Measurement. It has 10 sections. And the first section is going to be section 1.1 of this map that we have. The second one is chemicals compose thing. I'm not doing this. Is 1.2 of their book is 1.2 of that book. 1.3 of their book happens to be 2.5 of that book. So they start to deviate from the book. They start to customize their version of their book because they don't like the structure of the original book. More power to you. This is what OER provides. And you keep on seeing that the structure of their chapter 1 is then mostly chapter 2 of the original source. Chapter 2 is now chapter 4 with a little bit of 6 from the original source. And then this. Now, most of these things are from the Tro book, but you're not limited to just remixing from a single source. You'll see over here, they grabbed like an OpenStax book. That they felt was connected. The OpenStax chemistry book is a little bit more remedial than the sort of book that I would be using at an R1 institution. So it's convenient in order to be able to fold into this introductory chemistry book than a standard general chemistry book. And you'll see one that comes from this book over here and things like that. This is a nice remixing map. If you want a copy of this, you can actually get a copy of it directly on this page, and you can start to modify it yourself. It's not unheard of that this is the starting point for faculty teams in order to be able to build their book, that they say they build the remixing map and then they have an infrastructure, or they submit that to their campus for review, and that's part of the process, the workflow, in order to be able to get in the money in order to be able to do so. I encourage, for those of you that are from campuses that require a certification for attending this workshop, that this is one mechanism in order to be able to demonstrate some activity that's involved in that. Obviously, the remix that you create yourself would have the same similarity, but this shows a lot more thinking. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about remixing maps. Why am I doing that? Because remixing maps are important in order to be able to structure what you're doing, why you're doing it, and that. And what's the utility of a remixing map once you've actually remixed from it? A big fat zero. At least within the context that we have here, it has had its utility. The remixing map is actually reflected in the remix itself, and it has no utility. So you can take it and delete it. You can throw away your toilet paper or whatever mechanism you use in order to host the remixing map. It is meant in order to facilitate building of your book, and then its utility is largely lost, with maybe a few exceptions if you want to be able to keep track of learning objectives or other things that are organized off of here. So,
that's my state. It's here if you want it.
Okay, so where are we? No outstanding questions off of here. Here's my book. And I can come in and constantly restructure and constantly remix, and then that's it. The two things I want to talk about before we break for lunch. One is the auto number option. So you have the ability to turn on and off auto number. I will also mention that if you flip the switch, you'll get a little tutorial in order to guide you through different parts of the remixer. So that's useful for you, although the remixer is relatively simple in its technology and how it's operating. So I don't typically show that option available. So then we have the ability to turn on and off auto number, and then you have the options off of here. So Roy showed this before, and the auto numbers options are a little bit more limited than what I want the next version in order to show. So you have the ability to change the prefix of chapters. So you can say, I want all chapters to start with chapter. So now it's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. That's your preference. In order to do it, you can go about doing that. Sometimes I like that. Sometimes I don't. And then if I were to save to server, it would automatically paste these things down. I can then decide that I want the sections or the pages below the chapters to be called something. I can call it page. I don't think anyone does that, but that option is available, or section or module or other things. We're going to be changing it so you can have any arbitrary number or any arbitrary text that you want on here. So if you happen to be writing something in French, you may want to not call it chapter, but call it whatever chapter is in French, in order to make a more engaging resource that's out there. It's perfectly fine. That will be available soon. It's just not here unless you want to manually add it. And that right there requires a bunch of copy pastes in the titles. It's a little bit annoying, but that's basically how everyone else does it. We just give you a lot more power with the remixer. Okay. Then comes essentially what you want, ignore depth guide, what you want to be the numbering. So you want to start with number 2, and you may want the topic number, that's the page, start at 0. And then now you see that chapter 2 is the first one. It ignores this red one and it starts with 2.0. That's useful if you have pages that are called preludes. Preludes are oftentimes the start of a chapter of something that's meant to get your juices going in order to read. To be honest, when I was a student, I skipped over it. I think most people skip over it. Some people feel it's quite important. In other cases, if it's done well, it is very important. For example, what Roy mentioned in terms of using a prelude in order to talk about the faculty on your campus, and perhaps how that specific faculty member has some overlap with the nature of that chapter. So I can say, oh, chapter 2, here's a picture of Roy Simpson, and it deals with multiplication. And then I write down some context about Roy and multiplication, like Roy's favorite thing in the world to do is to multiply prime numbers or something along the lines, or Roy's research is in the multiplication of prime numbers or something along the context off of there that makes it a useful description instead of something that's just generic and oftentimes ignored. And then obviously you have a big picture of Roy on there in order to make it even more engaging for the students. But that again is a 0 that we have off of there. And that's about it. With one exception. So that exception is this. I'm going to bring in a book or a, where are we? I'm going to bring in a page, and I want to show you. Actually, let me do this from scratch. I want to show you what happens. So I'm going to delete these pages. I'm going to bring in a new chapter. So I'm going to save to server. I'm deleting 12 pages, and I'm pressed to server, and there you go. Okay, so first it creates the pages, and then it deletes the pages. That makes things a little bit easier in the way it's structured off of here. And you'll notice that the things that were pages that were created in green have 2 names. One says transcluded and one says forked. And this right here is also something that Roy stole from my mojo when he was presenting, which is the concept of transclusion. Now, we talked about this concept when we were discussing adapt, where we had the idea that you can build a question in the question bank and adapt, whether it's WebWork, or iMath AS, or H5P, or native. You have a lot more power than you have for eating in those individual, hint, hint, Roy for my open math. And then you can use those questions as necessary. So the author has the ability to update those questions, but you as a user that's using someone else's question have the ability in order to either stay update to that person's content or stay fixed to a revision when you actually viewed it. That's revision, but the key point is that essence is the concept of transclusion. Now, transclusion is an old term. It started in the 60s. It sounds a little fancy, but it's something that everyone should have some familiarity with if you actually formulate it in a different way. So most people on your computer, you're familiar with this concept of having something that looks like a duck, acts like a duck, quacks like a duck, maybe even eats like a duck if you were to actually cook it. But it's not really a duck. The example I'm talking about is if you're on a Windows box, I'm talking about shortcuts. You create a shortcut for a file or a shortcut for a directory, and it looks like that, it acts like that, it restructures that. You can move it around off of that. You click on it, it opens it up, but it's not really the file, or it's not really that directory. If you're on an Apple box, first, I'm sorry about that. But second, if you're on an Apple box, you know that as an alias. Same concept, same reason. If you are on a Unix box, if that's something that you actually like doing, it's called a symbolic link. ln-s and a few additional numbers off of there to use Linux text in order to do it. It behaves the same way. And that gives you a lot of flexibility in order to make something a little bit more dynamic, but not doing duplicates that are unnecessary. Everyone's cool with that concept, right? You have some familiarity with that aspect. I can give alternative analogies off of it, but it's actually useful off of that. Thumbs up or anything would be useful. Nodding. Okay. So what's that mean in terms of LibreText? It means that when you look at a page that has content on it, any page, the page is even on right now, you look at that page, and that content that's on the page may not actually be stored on the page that you're looking at. It may be stored on some other page somewhere else. And that when you look at the page itself, it just basically tells you, oh no, the content's really over there. It's the same thing like a shortcut or like an alias or symbolic link. So for all intents and purposes, it looks like it's on the page, but it's really somewhere else. Now, why would we want to go about doing that? Well, there are multiple reasons in order to do that. One is for curation. So if you make it so you have one source of material, like let's say the OpenStax, and you have 50 people who are building customized books off of that. And all they're doing is they're restructuring or reshifting out order, and they're deleting pages and things like that. But they're not doing much. They're not editing the content or changing the content or wanting to change the content on the page. And then we find a mistake on that page. There are mistakes everywhere. Commercial publishers, OER, and other things. But because we are a curatatory, because we care about updating content, any feedback that says this is an issue or this is an issue, we want to fix instantly. So we fix it on the source page. Now, if it's a fragmented thing where you have 50 other copies of that, what would you need to do in a normal world? Well, you have to go to that copy and fix it, and that copy and that fix it, and that copy and fix it, that copy and fix it. This is the fragmentation issue that I believe is plaguing the OER landscape. But if you make a central source and then everyone transcludes to it, which means that every time you look at a page on one person's book, is really looking at the content that's in this center book, and I fix that page, all 50 of them get fixed automatically. The same thing in adapt. If I modify the question and some person using that question, they will then automatically have that, or depending on the nature of the question, maybe automatically updated, or you have the versioning system that kicks in order to be able to ensure that it doesn't change on the course. But we discussed that in detail. That's what we have on our system. The second benefit of that is it doesn't generate, it reduces unnecessary duplication, which means the server and the database is smaller, it's more effective to find things, it's faster in order to operate, it's just better coding off of that. So what the remixer does is that when it makes a page up, more specifically a section up, it will always make a transcluded version of that page. The exception to that is a chapter, which is the top part, and that right there needs to be forked. It means a whole copy because the nature of how a chapter looks at all the pages below that. So if I were to click on one of these pages, like electrochemistry. So here's an electrochemistry page. This looks like it has content on the page, right? Everyone sees content on the page. There you go. And you think, okay, content on the page, I want to be able to edit it. So assuming that you have editing rights, which you do because it's your book, you may want to click edit, and this gets into tomorrow's discussion, and you'll see there's no content on the page. There's just one little link that says, really, the content is stored somewhere else. If I were to click on this thing, it will open up a tab, and it will show you the same page. because this is the same page that's shown, and I edit it, and now I can actually manipulate it and fix things, and it will then be reflected in my version of that book. Yeah. So let me change.
Delmar,
Yes.
you can do it because you have superpowers. Others have to write us and say, fix this.
True, but we're not talking about editing of source yet. So I just want to show you how to go about doing this. And Josh was mentioning that your rights to editing is only set to your ability in order for the book that you're created. Unless you're a developer or you have some advanced rights that we want to be able to do. And that's meant in order to make sure that the corpus of content that we host is has the greatest fidelity and people don't step on each other's toes. And yes, when we were more open, we had people stepping on each other's toes. So this was not something that we actually thought that we needed to do. It was something that was clear that we needed to do in the way we were operating. But we'll talk about editing later on. But I want to actually write something down here. Delmar's dog is cute. This is Delmar's dog, by the way, and he's cute. So I pasted this text here in this page that the source material is on there. I'm going to save this. This is the page that's transcluded. Okay. It doesn't have that down there. If I refresh the page, you're going to see that I have written this down, that Delmar's dog is cute. However, Daisy went off, so there you go. Now, and this means that I am tethered to the source material. So as long as I'm happy with the organization of the book, then this is fine. However, that's the equivalent of saying, here's an OpenStax book. Take it or leave it. That's how OpenStax operates. It's a publisher in the way it operates, and that's that. But if you want to customize it, you need to be able to hack into it and edit it. And as Josh was mentioning, you don't have the rights in order to edit the source that may be in someone else's area or in the central bookshelf. While I do, because I have godlike powers. So I'm going to save this and put that down. So what do I do if I want to customize this book? If you refresh this Delmar's dog is going to be gone. What happens if I feel that I don't like this equation? What do I do about that? Well, if I try to edit this thing, which this gets into the next thing, it's empty. So am I up a creek? No. You have the ability to take a page that's transcluded and convert it into what we call forked, which means it's just a copy or a clone. How do you go about doing that? Well, first thing to recognize is that there is a symbol on here that tells you that this page is transcluded. It's only available when you sign in. So all your students don't see it. And that's that little button right there that looks like a fork. Couldn't find an icon that was a real fork, although we probably should try to find one now. And that tells you this page is forked. And you have the ability to go under options, page options, and access the forker. And you're going to fork this page. When you tell people that you're going to fork this page, make sure you enunciate very clearly, although it might sound like you're trying to do something else to the page. When you fork the page, it's going to convert it from transcluded to copied or copy forked. I press this. It says, do you want to do it? It takes a moment. It says it's successfully forked. It will now reload, and you'll see that the fork is gone. Now, if I were to edit the page, it now tells me I can start editing it. And it's like Browning's poem, you've now gone into a different fork. You're a different pathway. If you prefer, I can go to the MCU and talk about different timelines, if that's a way you want to be able to describe that, which might be more apropos, certainly in this century, in order to be able to put this in place. And it has a different existence. It's completely on the different thing. Loki would have lots of issues with this sort of aspect, but it's fragmented. My argument is you should fragment fork when you need to. Otherwise, if you're happy with the original source, don't fork. It has no effect on the way your book is operating in any way whatsoever. But it makes it convenient in order to keep things in a manner such that you can curate and update effectively. we'll talk about a little bit of other things, but when we have this sort of code here, this means that this number here is changed on that number up there in order to be able to reflect it. So you can actually rearrange like OpenStax books and still not have to edit it in order to be able to change the numbering inside and everything fixed, with the exception again of what Roy mentioned, if you were to hard code a reference to a specific content on there. I'm going to cancel this, and there you go. That is remixing. With a little bit of editing that I wanted to put into a context here, even though we'll be discussing that in more detail tomorrow. So you now have the power. I will mention that the OER Remixer got the OE Global Excellence Award for technology, I think was the field, open technology, several years ago, in part because it's an exceedingly powerful tool. It's also exceedingly simple in order to be able to operate. And the reason it's able to be powerful is not because of the technology of it, it's because it's sitting on top of this massive corpus of content that we've harvested and been honing and curating for the community in order to capitalize on it. So there were a few questions on here. Let me address that in a moment and just talk about what we're going to do. We're going to switch over to lunch in a moment. When we come back from lunch, which will be at 1:15 Pacific time, 4:15 Eastern time, we're going to go into our breakout rooms. And basically, the goal is to build a book, remix a book from existing material. We're not going to edit the material in any way whatsoever. I want you just to be able to build a structure of that. One of the starting things that you will have to do either in the or at least I recommend you do in the breakout room, although you can do it during the lunch break, is to build some sort of remixing map, saying, I want chapter 1 to be of this book, I want chapter 2 to be of this book, I want chapter 3 to be of this book, I don't like this section, or something along the lines off of that. I typically recommend, when we have a short period of time, to remix at least 2 chapters. However, we have a decent amount of time that you can actually flesh out a better book in order to be able to make something that actually looks like what you want it to be. And such. So anyways, there are a couple of questions here, and then we can actually break unless Jennifer addressed it. Medea asked, you may cover some, but if I need to update the text, maybe to take a specific college reference, is this where knowing all the attribution code comes into play? Actually, the attributions is covered by auto attribution. Now, I took this page and I forked it, right? Even if I didn't fork it, you'll see it has the attribution to tell you where it came from. This came from 3.2 by Taro Sato in this license. You notice I now have the author here because we fixed that from yesterday. And here's the source. You're 100% solid. Attribution is right. You don't need to worry about it. That is what auto attribution gives to you. Okay? And if you don't appreciate it now, go work on some other's platform and then come back to this and you'll understand why it's actually very useful for things. So you're ready to rock with that and as you edit it. So yeah, okay, copying correct. This is cool. It is cool. This was a game changer when we released it. I'm actually quite surprised that no one else in the platform has, no other OER people have made stuff like this. And the real reason behind it is technology is easy. You need that corpus of content all put together in order to be able to do that. And no one does anything like that, maybe with the exception of OER Commons, but OER Commons infrastructure that they actually host is really small. So it's not that big of a deal. Okay, so.
Well, Delmar?
Yes.
I think it's the common format that actually enables this, especially with the renumbering inside the chapters.
True. It's the standardization of the corpus. So it's the quantity of the corpus and the fact that we standardized it. And it's not just basically a hodgepodge repository of here's some PDFs in this format, and here's an EPUB in this format, and here's a website in this format. You can't actually combine that. Even if you have a lot of those things, you can't combine that effectively. And that's largely an issue that OER Commons would have, and many other repositories like the Elsevier repository that is quite popular in some academic circles. I can't remember what it was called. That's just PDF storage and things like that. And so, okay. With that, take a break, get up, walk, go grab a glass of wine if that's gets you going, and we'll come back in an hour, go into breakout rooms. I encourage you, if you have time, to start preparing a remixing map for what you want to do, and then you can act on that remixing map in the breakout room. Although you can certainly deal with it right there. And I'll let you go. I can address any questions if anyone wants to stick around in order to deal with it right now. But otherwise, enjoy your break. So let me actually, Mohammed, you can ask your question and then I can turn off the.
Yes, if we create a map right now, where it will save, in the sandbox or in the work?
Well,
So
the remixing map is on your side. So you're creating a remixing map in some document. So you just pull down if you want an Excel form, where's the remixer? If you click on the remixing map button right here, you can then get the Excel form right here in order to be able to do it if you wanted to like that. But to be honest, just a piece of paper and a pen is all you need that says, I want this book, this section to be this book in this section in my my book. That's it. No. In that case,
sorry, I phrased my question not correct. I was talking about the book structure that we create with the remixer.
Those will be in the workbench.
Workbench, okay.
Yeah. So everything is done in the workbench, and then you request for us to publish it, to move it from the workbench into the bookshelf. Now that request can be done at any point that you feel comfortable that you want to share your resource to the community. And different people have different comfort zones in terms of what they're willing to share to people in the community. Some people are super rough and they don't want to show anything unless it's perfect to the community. Some people are more loosey-goosey and say, look, this is 50% done. This has some utility to some people in the community. I will share it, and they continue to build it in the bookshelf. It's up to you.